All right. Well, Anthony Stowers is a doctoral candidate in Florida State's Political Science Department and a Tallahassee native. Their primary research is authoritarianism, and their research interests include identity, quantitative analysis, and political institutions. Additionally, they work to improve accessibility for trans students, students with learning disabilities, and students with physical disabilities. When they aren't studying, Anthony knits and gardens. Thank you so much for being here, Anthony.
No problem. So I feel like this is probably not one of the more exciting talks going on, but my goal here is to kind of, well, I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff that I was like, oh man, I would totally take that if I weren't giving my own talk. But so what I'm trying to do here is really give a reframe on how we're discussing accessibility with respect to the LGBT community. And so hopefully this is something that will be helpful to those of you who are here in engaging with other people, because this is what has worked the best for me. So I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation. And I'm also going to share in the chat a Google Drive link to most of the resources I'm going to be referencing. So my slides are in there and y'all can check those out. And there are a few other things as well. So let me share here. All right, so I'm going to be talking about why it is actually really, really important not just to tolerate those LGBTQ2+ people and neurodiverse people who are in our environments, but to actually prioritize having that kind of diversity in our environments. This is something that is not just for, you know, the brownie points of we're being inclusive. It actually is something that is really beneficial, and there is a great deal of research that has been done indicating, hey, actually these groups of people are really important to have in a society because there are benefits that these people can bring that others may not be able to bring into a social environment. So I am, again, Anthony. I use the pronoun they most often in English. He is also fine. If I'm speaking Spanish, I only use él because I do not understand how to use gender neutral pronouns in Spanish yet. So I just like to give that background info because there are different ones depending on the language. So currently, let me change my speaker view so I can actually see my slides. So I'm from Tallahassee area. I attend the main FSU campus. The land I am on and that I have grown up on is also Appalachia and Seminole land. So I'm very grateful to those groups of people for maintaining stewardship of this land before I got to be here. So beyond that, I'm a UCF alum, so I graduated with degrees in English Lit and International Relations. I focused on counterterrorism and Russian studies. And that was a really interesting perspective to come into before coming out as trans. So currently I'm a doctoral student. I'm looking at the appeal of authoritarianism among US residents. So like, why are people actually perceiving authoritarian ideals as something that seems beneficial? So this is my professional background, which of course has nothing to do with either of the things I'm talking about. So I'm not a mental health professional, but I have had pretty extensive training. So I've worked on test prep for students with learning disabilities. I've also gotten pretty extensive compliance training for students who do have individualized learning plans associated with a learning disability. I also helped develop the protocol for testing accommodations for a charter network in Connecticut. And on the LGBT side, I have done research on authoritarianism and how that impacts perceptions of gay men and lesbians. I've worked with lobbyists with Planned Parenthood of Southern New England to get pro-trans legislation passed at the state level there. And I've also worked with some schools and churches and medical centers locally, as well as in Connecticut, to improve their policy with respect to trans issues. And a lot of these successes have kind of taken the same tack that I'm going to be taking in this presentation today, framing this as something that is really beneficial to include rather than something that is kind of laborious to incorporate into our existing structures. So the other things that qualified me to talk about this from a personal perspective are I'm transmasculine. This means when I was born, the doctor was like, it's a girl. And when I grew up, I was like, actually, no, that is not correct. I'm non-binary, which means I don't identify as male or female. Neither of those are correct identifiers for me. I am queer. Also, I have ADHD, I live with chronic pain, and I have some other kinds of learning challenges that are really tough to diagnose. Most of this is associated with it's very expensive to diagnose things like autism and dyslexia, and I have the accommodations I need, so I don't have appropriate diagnoses, and we know that with the medical team that I'm working with. So generally, I encounter a lot of disbelief that I can be all of these things and do anything else at all. And that is a ridiculous misconception to me because, like, hang on, my slide's not advancing. Oh, there we go. So I do use a lot of accessibility tools. These are things that I need actually, but if you're looking at these accessibility devices, one of them is just like exercise. And this is something that is critical to maintaining my health so that I can do my job. But a lot of these things are just normal things that every person benefits from. And this is something I've noticed more and more. As I understand the accommodations that I need, I realize, wait a second, these are things that actually every person would just benefit from in some form or another. And I think that's really the crux of what I'm trying to identify, is that the things that I need to be successful as a trans person and as a person with disabilities are actually beneficial for every person to have access to. Nonetheless, I've had a lot of people who responded in completely inappropriate ways. So these are actual things that people have said to me in professional or community environments. I've gotten, you're lying, you would never be able to be in grad school with all these problems, you'd be too stupid. I've gotten, you should be grateful I gave you any of my time given your situation. This was said to me by an administrator once. I've gotten, you have to stop telling people you're trans if you want to succeed. I've gotten, you can't have a learning disability, you're smart. I've gotten all different kinds of variants of this. And these are really ridiculous to me because from my perspective, actually being trans and queer and neurodivergent are the reasons that I'm good at what I do. And I want to kind of talk through a little bit of the ideas that I've found that have helped me to identify these identities of mine as things that are actually beneficial and critical to what work I'm trying to do in my career. So neurodiversity is a term I know some people may not have heard before. This is an alternative way that many people with what we call learning disabilities think about our brains. So neurodiversity describes people who have differences in thinking and have as much potential to make positive contributions to society as neurotypical people. At the same time, neurodiverse people often experience challenges in a neurotypical world that does not always understand or accommodate them. So I really like this idea. I think this very much describes my experience because my brain does not work the way everybody else's brain seems to be working. And there are things that I know how to do that other people don't tend to know how to do. I also sometimes meet people who are neurodiverse in ways that I don't share, who I realize, wow, this person can bring something that I can't and that neurotypical people can't either. So a couple of just background pieces of information, and then we're going to go into a quick thought experiment. So I will use a couple of thought experiments in this that are grounded in anthropological and cultural research on neurodiversity and trans identity. So first, trans people are actually a lot more likely to be neurodivergent than cis people. I'm not sure exactly what the numbers are because we haven't produced any holistic research. There are a few very specific areas where we've looked at how much more likely are people with ADHD to be trans, or how much more likely are autistic people to be trans. But overall, we really don't know what the numbers are. However, we have substantial research on the cognitive benefits of ADHD. In addition to research in a very clinical setting, researchers have gone into cultures that practice indigenous traditions and that haven't modernized a great deal culturally and seen, hey, in these traditions, we actually see that people with ADHD are outperforming their neurotypical peers in certain ways. And so these are things that are not always considered intrinsically disabling. So when I was a kid, I was told it's actually good for our community that you have different gifts to bring to the table. So I never got the message that was something is wrong with the way your brain works. I was told, well, you can't do some things and other things that you can do, nobody else is able to do. And so this was the framing device for me. And this was actually something that I grew to really like about myself. So in line with that, I want to give you an illustration of what I mean when I'm saying that this is something that is beneficial. And I will use a thought experiment designed based on research that I've read that focuses on symptoms associated with ADHD. So our first thought experiment, we are going to imagine that we are thousands and thousands of years back in human history. We are Paleolithic hunters in this thought experiment. So suppose you go out and you are trying to hunt for some large animal that is going to feed your community. And you bring this one hunter with you, and she does not ever focus. She's always looking off at something else while all of you are focused on the animal that you're trying to hunt. So why do you bring this person with you? Because you do bring this person with you. In societies that practice these kinds of things today, they bring this person with them. So why? That person notices this thing and is like, huh, what's this thing over here that's distracting me? That's the reason you're aware that there's some kind of predatory danger potentially. And we do in fact see that people in cultures that practice these kinds of hunting practices today often do have members who show things that we would identify as ADHD symptoms that actually increase their sensitivity and awareness to potential dangers in the environment. So evolutionarily, ADHD is a critical adaptation that can help human groups to survive. In a professional context, this looks very different, of course, than in a hunting context, but some ways that this helps me a lot are, I know that my brain and how my brain works helps me to identify problems in accessibility. So I actually know what accessibility challenges exist, and because I need things that are accessible for myself, this gives me a lot of opportunities to make materials better for colleagues and for students. It also helps me to connect really far apart ideas. So when ADHD people are getting distracted, actually our brains are connecting things that are really far apart. And this is really beneficial to have in a research environment. Obviously, you don't want everybody who's this distractible, but if you have one person who's kind of like this, you may be able to connect ideas that would otherwise be tough to connect. Another way that this really helps me is I know what my limitations are. I have a clinical label for what my limitations are. And so I can very clearly communicate, hey, this is going to be something I struggle with. And what I've found, which has shocked me, is that this opens the door for some of my colleagues to say, man, I'm so glad you're telling me that you have these limitations. Here's what mine are. And one thing that is very specific that I've really benefited from in being a person who is not neurotypical is that I navigate a lot of linguistic accessibility challenges. So I usually use specific fonts, I use screen readers because I struggle with written text. And I've actually found that talking about these challenges has opened the door for colleagues who are non-native English speakers to say, hey, this is actually not accessible to me. And bringing up the issues that I'm experiencing can let colleagues communicate with me and communicate with my department more effectively about what their needs are as well. So this is something that I actually really cherish and value about myself and about what I bring to a professional context. And I pulled back here my accessibility tools. And when we think about people with ADHD, there are a lot of these things like web plugins that I use to convert a font. Lots of people without ADHD use web plugins for different things. I use a standing desk so I can actually move around while I'm working. And we actually know that that's just beneficial for everyone. So oftentimes when I'm in an environment and I'm communicating what my accessibility needs are, they're really normal things that everybody in the environment needs, but may not know that they need to articulate because the severity of their need may not be as great. I also have my husband's patience. I need this as an accessibility tool, but like, this is just to illustrate everybody needs people to be patient with them. It helps me to be able to articulate that from a clinical perspective, but this is ultimately something that everybody benefits from. All right, so we're going to move on to the LGBTQ2+ identity and the thought experiment with this. So obviously this is a huge umbrella. I assume that many of the people who are present at this in the first place identify somewhere in this umbrella. So I will just very broadly say people who are in this umbrella are generally those who do not identify with the binary sex assigned to them at birth, or those who do not feel romantically and sexually attracted exclusively to people assigned a different binary sex at birth. So this is a huge category. And historically, we actually know that many different cultures have had vastly different conceptions of, hang on, oh, sorry, I see, oh, sorry, I was getting a notification, it was nothing. So we actually see that many different cultural groups have specific roles for trans community members, or I didn't note this, but other LGBT community members as well. And these are things that people are doing within a society that are roles not fulfilled by people who would be identified in our society as heterosexual and cisgender. So man, my slides aren't advancing. Okay. So here's thought experiment number 2, and this is based on research on different cultures that have traditions of accepting LGBTQ2+ people. So imagine you are experiencing a relationship conflict. I guess I want to specify this is a straight relationship conflict, so this is going to be very stereotypical. And so imagine you have this couple who a woman in the relationship is like, oh my gosh, I have to take care of the baby, I have to do the cooking, I have to make sure the dry cleaning's done, I have to do the sewing, I have to do all the tasks for the house, and is having a marital conflict with her husband who is like, oh my gosh, you're always busy, you have no time for me, and I'm doing all of this work to bring money home and to keep our family safe. So this feels like a really intractable conflict. And suppose you have a person who has experienced both of these gender roles. So when I see my straight friends experiencing things like this, it's really obvious to me that my experiences in a masculine gender role have been a lot more emotionally lonely. It's harder to connect with other people because there are a lot of professional expectations of me. But when I've been in a feminine gender role, I notice that people expect me to take care of a lot of like service related things or emotionally related things. And I have no time for myself. It feels like I have too much going on. But I also feel in a masculine gender role really lonely sometimes. So I can look at my friends' interactions and see, both of these people are experiencing issues that I understand. It could be really obvious to me to say, hey, it seems like the masculine person in this relationship is lonely. Why does he not just hang out with the baby for an hour a day? Like that is actually an important form of human connection that releases a lot of burden from his partner, who maybe has time to go paint again and make art for her husband again, like she used to when things weren't so busy. And this is a really obvious kind of thing to identify if you have been in both of these gender roles. And of course, this is going to differ vastly based on the situation. It is only one generalized example. And we actually do see that in many cases, people we would identify as LGBTQ do perform work like this in their communities. So this is a well-substantiated thing that LGBT people are doing worldwide and have been doing for millennia. In a professional context, again, this looks very different, but nonetheless, it does give me the opportunity to point out conflicts between people experiencing only one of two different gender roles. So some examples of this are, this has really made me sensitive to when men in my environments are giving me credit for women colleagues' ideas. I remember when they used to give men colleagues credit for my ideas because they perceived me as a woman, and now I can say, hey, you're doing it again. It also means that I can, with a great deal of credibility, identify to others ways that my environment is not open and accessible to people from different gendered or sexual experiences. Also, I can kind of be aware that there are these two different sets of experiences that my colleagues are having, and it makes me very aware of how little my colleagues are able to identify with the perspective that they've never experienced. So this actually increases my sensitivity to knowing, oh man, if I have colleagues who are like experiencing racial marginalization, I know that I'm not getting all of what they know and what they're experiencing. So actually my trans experience lets me know I need to be asking for feedback from my colleagues who are people of color. Otherwise, I don't know whether I'm acting right, just the same way they don't know whether they're acting right to me as a trans person. So this has been really critical for me. And a last thing is, this has really helped me to have difficult conversations with male colleagues whose behavior is sexist, because I can say, yes, this is how I was treated when people perceived me as a woman, and this is how I'm treated now, and this is the way you're behaving. And this has actually enriched my workplace environment a lot. This has helped us to have these hard conversations and notice the structure of gender depression. So the overall theme, if you're not taking anything else from this, is LGBTQ2+ people and disabled people are not a problem in a workplace. We actually can make your workplace better. And if you are a person who identifies with one of these items, I've actually had a lot of success portraying it this way to colleagues or authority figures in workplaces who I was having a tough time with, by kind of identifying, yeah, I know you don't get it, but here's actually how I'm trying to help. I've increased the receptivity of my environment to the kinds of improvements that I can identify. So just some general overall things that may not apply to me specifically, but to other people who are in the neurodivergent spectrum. Generally, there are people who may be able to focus on different details of projects, who may be able to communicate maybe in images or in different ways that are necessary in a workplace environment. We may be able to identify areas for growth and tolerance. And this last one, nobody really appreciates in the moment, but I really struggle to have the social awareness to be aware of when it might be rude to point out discriminatory issues. And I'm very prone to just say, well, that was sexist. And that means that we talk about it, even though it's really uncomfortable for people. And then similarly, LGBT people can bring in other things to a workplace environment. Like most of the time, the people who are having the wrong pronouns chosen aren't actually trans people. So if you're working in an international environment, I might see a name that I've never seen before, and I might have no idea how to gender it. Or I might have a colleague who is not a native speaker of English. And if I include my pronouns, they're going to know what gender my name goes with. And even for cis colleagues, they may not know what gender that name goes with. And including pronouns can actually help to avoid a lot of embarrassment for people who are looking at names they don't recognize, or for non-native speakers of English. This is also a way that we can identify problems with the applicability of language. And I think also, if you're LGBTQ, you have had to navigate these invisible social norms enough that there's an explicit understanding of them that can be brought into a classroom or work environment. So I have a couple of action items that are really useful. So I'll go over these very quickly, and I do have the slides available to you if you want to look at these things later, because obviously it is more than the 30 seconds I can give to each slide. So use subtitles. That's a way to increase your accessibility, and it takes no work whatsoever. You actually can probably see me hovering over the caption bar. Captions are off. So this is how easy it is to turn captions on if you're using PowerPoint. All right, subtitles are on. I do not have to do any work. You will have subtitles. This is available anywhere in PowerPoint. I believe you can do this in Zoom as well. I don't know how. In person, you can clip on a $12 Bluetooth mic, have your slides up on a board, and this will work as well. Oh man, the subtitle said $1,200. That is not correct, $12. Another thing you can do is just include your pronouns. It can be as easy as sticking it in the first slide of your presentation. If you're in a discussion board setting, you can just say, intro post, what's your name? What's your major? What year are you in school? What do you want to do with your career? What pronouns do you use? And this is an indicator to students who might use pronouns other than he or she that, okay, even if this instructor is cisgender, they're communicating that they understand how critical pronouns are. So here is a medium item. This slide is just for learning disability accessibility. Florida State makes available to Florida State students, staff, employees, the Office of Distance Learning, the Program for Instructional Excellence, and the Center for the Advancement of Teaching. All of these have taught me how to do a lot of the things that I'm doing in this presentation for accessibility. And if you would like to have a one-on-one meeting, John Crow does these. It is free. He is amazing and has really helped me increase my accessibility. Another way to be helpful is to just practice using gender inclusive language. So it's very easy. You can just say, instead of ladies and gentlemen, we're in the South, so y'all. It is that simple. And these kinds of things are things that we need to be very aware of, because, so for this last item, I know that we have a lot of debate about whether pregnant women versus pregnant people is a worthwhile substitution to make. And I will say, I am a person who is perceived as masculine and not interested or able to become pregnant. I actually would like to be pregnant at some point. But right now, I live in a country where all of the laws governing pregnancy do not apply to me legally, because legally I'm identified as male. So I actually don't know the extent to which the laws even protect me, because they are specifically written to apply to women.
Oh, Anthony, I can get you on a TV show right now that would love you.
Oh, I wish. That'd be awesome. Yeah, so these are things that I like to practice, and I literally do mean practice. Like if I have a friend who tells me, well, actually my pronouns are they now, I am gonna practice that. So a friend of mine changed his pronouns from they to he recently, and I went to my husband and I said, all right, my friend changed his pronouns. I'm gonna tell you a story about him because I can't get it right. And I said them out loud 3 or 4 times until I could do it. And so these are just really easy things, because People assume that it's easy for trans people to switch pronouns. It is not. It is very difficult. I really do have to work on and practice this. Ants on a Log is a band that I know the person who does this, and they actually make music and they change the pronouns in popular songs so that you could get a feel for changing pronouns. It's tough, but it's really good practice. And sometimes I review my old written instructions and see like, ooh, I said ladies and gents there. I was excluding even myself. That was goofy of me. So these are things that I need to practice and probably others do too. Okay, so last items. This is hard only emotionally, but I do this. I actually have a form that I just copy, paste, edit what I need to. So I email people who make non-inclusive content. So I'll email people and say, hey, your survey included 2 gender categories. This is about an issue that disproportionately affects non-binary people, and I can't even tell you who I am correctly. So you actually aren't doing good research here. And I just send it off. And usually they'll say, oh my God, we didn't even think of that. I almost never get mean responses. You can also say something really simple, like if you know something is an accessibility issue that's easy to address, you can email somebody and say like, hey, I noticed that some of your resources are only available as PDFs. Can you also make those available as docx files? Because personally, I can't do anything with PDFs. I gotta have the Word doc file. Or you can say, hey, I noticed that you did this presentation. Did you know that you can click one button and you have subtitles, and that makes it more accessible for people with hearing issues? So these are really easy things to do, and you can actually just copy paste, and it's only hard emotionally to tell somebody that they're not being accessible. So finally, just some final notes. This did not require me to tell you a tragic life story. I know that we often have trans people who are just like, when I was 3 years old, I knew I was really a boy. I hated Barbies and played with trucks, and everybody was mean to me about it. And that was not necessary for me to make a lot of points that are really critical about trans and disabled accessibility. So I do want to prioritize. I actually can just be a professional who has good stories that aren't about trans or disabled pain. It is relevant that not everybody feels the same way I do. I was very, very lucky to be raised in an environment where my trans identity wasn't really accepted, but my neurodiversity really was accepted and was prized, and people were grateful that I was a little different. I'm able to feel good about who I am because my identity is respected professionally, personally, and in my community of friends. Like, people know that I have these learning challenges. People accept this about me. People know that I'm trans. They know that I'm queer, and they just accept this about me. And if they don't, they are not in my life, and that's fine. So these are just the general final notes. Don't assume these exact same things apply to anybody else, but the research is more broadly applicable. That is the end of my personal spiel. If y'all have any questions, I am ready for those.
You know, when you talk about, you know, the gender neutral language and all of that, I have this habit, and I've had it my entire life. I say you guys. I have said it forever, and I have a lady that points it out to me every single time. So it's okay though. I appreciate it because you don't know what you don't know when you're saying it, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
I see that it took me a long time to stop myself from saying you guys, but I eventually was just like, man, I'm just gonna embrace the fact that I'm already Southern and say y'all. So that worked great. I think David had a hand up next.
Thank you so much for today. This was wonderful. Here's something I struggle with, and I struggle with it in living in the South. I say sir and ma'am to everybody, and I'm having such a hard time because like the person inside my head goes, no, dude, don't do that. But it's like, I don't know what else to do because I'm wired to say sir or ma'am. So thoughts?
Right, so personally, I try to curb my sirs and ma'ams with younger people, but like, so I mean, obviously I'm coming at this from a place of like, in person, people really don't know what to make of me. So if I'm interacting with older Southern people, I am out of like respect and to communicate that I'm trying to respect their cultural norms, I'm gonna say sir and ma'am. For younger people, I typically am not going to do that. I do think that that is kind of a norm that's changing and that might be appropriate differently for different environments. It's tough because that is a cultural norm in like all of the South, right? And like, man, I'm gonna say yes, ma'am, to an older person if I meet them in the store, like, of course. So I think that's a tough thing, and it is like we're in a very blended culture, right? So like, it is kind of important to show respect, but you are gonna kind of make faux pas sometimes, and that does happen where sometimes I say sir or ma'am, and it was not the appropriate time to use that. And I think to me, I just kind of have to recognize, all right, well, we have a lot of different cultural groups in the same setting. I'm doing my best and I'm ready to apologize if I make a mistake. Yeah, it's tough.
Thank you.
So I think Elizabeth was next.
So first, I want to just say thank you for an amazing presentation, and you put into words very eloquently, I might add, a lot of things that I was not able to articulate coming from a similar position. And I think that academia has its own culture, especially at this level, that's very interesting to navigate when you are neurodivergent or queer or what have you. The question I had, and if you don't want to answer this, that's fine, but I was wondering if you had read into anything around the reliability and accuracy of diagnosis in critical mental health, around the idea that we pathologize normal human experiences sometimes too much, and if that influences at all what you've presented on today.
Yeah, so okay, yeah, so I tend to really think that things like ADHD are just normal human cognitive diversity. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at. And so it's obviously tough to get a lot of the research, because a lot of the research on something like ADHD is going to be very geared towards identifying this as a medical distinction. Mm-hmm. And I think it's difficult to say how much is the pathologization of this an issue, because the research is based on identifying this as a disability. I do think that in professional environments, I've had a lot of success framing this as ADHD is a disability for this environment, or like ADHD is a disability if I'm required to sit still for 3 hours in a seminar class. And so I think research-wise, it's really tough to say. Interpersonally, I've had a lot of success framing this as an environmental disability rather than a cognitive disability, because it does, I mean, I think neurotypical people really do want to be able to say, well, what's wrong with you? And if I can identify, I am disabled by the environment in this way, I generally have a lot more success. Or I can say, like, you know, I can't sit still for 3 hours. Is it okay if I bring my knitting? I'm going to be way less annoying if I have something to do with my hands in class. And then professors will realize, oh man, this environment is the issue, and see me doing better with some other, I have my knitting right here. I like knit in class, and they know that I perform better. So
I have a box of fidget toys literally right next to my computer. And that's actually really good to hear, because I'll be transitioning back on campus soon. And I've realized I've gotten very comfortable with adapting my environment to my needs. And I am a little concerned about returning back to an environment not willing to compromise that anymore.
So another thing is, if you have any kind of documentation, like at all, that's really helpful. I would totally recommend go to the Office of Accessibility Services, because they have a lot of very standard accessibility things. So I have accommodations. My accommodations are basically like, I can ask for extra time on tests. And there are a couple of other boilerplate things, like they gave me access to a screen reader. It is a game changer. I totally recommend it if you can get that. I didn't realize it could be beneficial for people without visual impairments. But the really cool thing is that they don't have a lot of accommodations associated with like the need to fidget or something. But if you have that paper that you can send to professor, you can talk to your accommodation specialist and say, hey, I need you to back me up when I say that I need to be able to have something to fidget with in class. And then if the professor has an issue, you are covered. it is so helpful, totally worth even getting accommodations that are not that helpful just to have the social backup.
Well, thank you so much for your contribution here. And as a side note, in a networking sense, I'm in a mental health field. If you would ever have the time to collaborate or be interested in collaborating on some of the things that you've discussed, we can exchange information at some point. So
Yes, let's do that.
but thank you. That's all for me.
You're so welcome. I hope it's helpful.
Hey,
Julie,
Julie,
did you have your hand raised?
I do.
sorry.
And Anthony, oh my God, this has been so amazing. I have a son who is like next to the in the dictionary ADHD, that's his photo. And so he's now 43. But in learning this process through the whole thing, it has not been a disability. I think it's an evolution of where we are, of where most people are headed today. There's so many diagnoses of ADHD. And I think it's just basically multitasking, you know, and knowing how to use what your gifts are, like you said. He tried the medication, you know, young in high school, and that just numbed him out. And he just learned that, wow, Mom, if I can listen to the radio and play my games, then I can learn. And even in class, they learned that if they gave him a space to do things, that he could learn it. But if they forced him to sit still, it could not. So he has actually learned that, you know, turning into an international DJ, when he was playing 4 decks at a time, he's like, Mom, that's the only time that all my brains are at peace. Because basically ADHD people in a gist have 4 thoughts to our every one. So you have to occupy all your brains. And he's like, Mom, that's the only time all my brains are at peace. So he has actually found an occupation where he's an engineer, and he can repair lots of different things and be fidgeting all at once. And he's learned to make it work for him. So it's not a disability, in my opinion. I think it's an evolution. And I think with all that you have going on, oh my God, this has been such an amazing presentation. You can't imagine how much you've done for so many people. And I'm going to save this and share this with so many.
Thank you. Yeah, I also think there's been some writing that's, so I also used to teach high school before I was in a grad program, I left to transition, I came back, and here I am. And while I was gone, I taught high school, and it was so strange to me because I would think, you're saying that this child has ADHD, but what you actually mean is that he doesn't want to sit still for 7 hours straight, and he's a child, so what's wrong with you? And I think there's so much power in being able to say, yes, this is the way that you are diagnosing me. But to me, I'm kind of like, I'm not communicating to you what's wrong with me. I'm communicating to you the words that you need me to say so that you understand what my brain is doing. And then I need you to trust me when I say that it's not like what you think it is inside my brain. And that's, you know, I really like being me. I wish everybody else.
And I think that is what diversity comes down to. You know,
Yeah.
that's diversity, whether it has to do with sexuality, education, you know, attention span, all of that. I think that we're all so important. And look at you, look how brilliant you are. Look how much you've accomplished. And to say you had a disability, no, ma'am, no, not going to say that. I'm not saying it, because you are just absolutely brilliant, and you contribute so much to humanity. And I'm so grateful for you.
I think I do like to say, like, so my best friend in throughout like a lot of my life had like pretty severe disabilities, and I think that was something that really did allow her different opportunities. And so I like in an absolute sense, I don't really think of myself as having a disability, but I think it is really important to me to use that language and to say, like, yes, I am a person like who like has a disability. I also have asthma, so that's an issue in there too. But like, I actually do find a lot of power in saying I have a disability, because it's like, yes, I do, and I'm brilliant.
Right.
And I think that's been something that I really love to have that identifier for myself, because it's a way of saying, like, yeah, like I'm not one of the good disabled people. Like, I'm not good at being disabled because I'm brilliant. There are people who have intellectual disabilities who are bringing so much to society that I could never, like, oh gosh, it's really astonishing. Like, there's some, there's writing by like a number of different people who have Down syndrome who have been just like really instructive for me in handling bigotry. And I'm like, damn, like, I'm so grateful for the way that this person's mind works, and that they are identifying themselves as disabled and as a force for good in society, because like I can feel, wow, like actually their disability is something that I needed to exist in the world to help me handle mine. So I hear what you're saying. I just like, I find a lot of power.
That's beautiful. And I agree. I mean, I know a lot of people who have children who are on the, autistic spectrum, and they're brilliant. They're just not like, what's considered the norm. So thank you so much, Anthony.
You're welcome. Sheree, sorry, real quick.
I was like, we got 50 seconds left and we're going to be taken back on over. So anybody else have a question or anything? This was quite amazing. You really did articulate a lot of things that I don't think any of us have heard articulated the way that you did today. And it was quite amazing. So I want to thank you so much for being here. And I know people want to share this recording. So once we get it all done, we'll make sure that everybody gets the information. So thank you so much for coming today.
And thank you to everybody for coming and listening. I appreciate you using your time in this way so much. On a Saturday, you did not have to be here, and you were. Thank you so much.